Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to subscribe, follow, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Now, together, let's find the divine. Okay, welcome to another episode of The Girlfriend God. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Molly. And I forgot to ask, is it Remer or Remer?
It's Remer.
It's Remer, okay. Molly Remer. Sorry, I always just call you Molly. She is a priestess, a mystic, and a poet in central Missouri. Molly and her husband, Mark, co-create story goddesses. We're going to talk more about that. Jewelry and ceremony and altar items at Brigid's Grove. Molly is the author of 10 books, including Walking with Persephone, Whole and Holy, Womanrunes, the Goddess Devotional, and 365 Days of Goddess. She is the creator of the devotional experience 30 Days of Goddess, and she loves savoring small magic and everyday enchantment. Links to all of your books, your website, and the Brigid's Grove Etsy shop are in the show notes. So, Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So, right off the bat, let's talk about these story goddesses, which I love and have a few. I'd love to have them all. And sometimes when I see all your pictures, I just imagine them as if they're falling from the sky, because you seem to create so many and so many new ones. So first, I just want to ask you about that. Like, how did story goddesses come to be? And for anybody who's listening, if you're unfamiliar, you've got to go check them out, because you got to have at least one.
Well, and I really feel like that's one of their top qualities, is they're really meant to be like a portable devotional. They're meant to be like a portable devotional item, something you can hold on in your hand. And somebody asked me once, like, why do you make goddesses? And I'm like, it's partially about making the divine tangible. Like, I want to give things for people to literally hold on to. Like, that's really part of why I do it. And I've written before, I talk about life in the palm of her hand. And then I'm thinking I got my little goddesses, and it's like, are we living life in the palm of the hand, or palm of our hands, or is she in the palm of our hands? And the answer is both. Like, the answer is both. Right. And so I started making goddesses. I started making goddesses a long time ago. Originally, it was a birth art connection because I was pregnant with my oldest child, and I was like exploring pregnancy through art and like making connections. I read the book Birthing from Within by Pam England, who's big into birth art as a way of processing like childbirth experiences and preparing yourself through artistic processes. And so I started making goddesses way back then, and I made them they were needle felted at the time. And I continued to make goddesses in various iterations throughout my other pregnancies. And it was in my pregnancy with my daughter, who followed multiple pregnancy losses, that I started to make a little series of clay sculptures, really as an effort to, for me, it was about reclaiming my trust in myself and reclaiming my own power, it was an act of reclamation to keep making these little figures. And it was an act of hope, and it was an act of trust, because I had these pregnancy loss experiences. I was really afraid of her dying too. I'd had a baby die, and then I had a miscarriage after that. And I was really afraid that I was going to lose her too. And I started to make these figures as a way to like re-inhabit my own power and my own strength and my own capacity and my own trust, and to like heal myself. And then after she was born and she was alive, yay, I kept making. So then I kept making them. I'd make a little nursing mother, and then I'd make a little mother that had a little toddler, and then I'd make a mother with the other babies. And then I started to make them as, complete unto herself. I was kind of like, who am I outside of this mothering identity and this pregnancy, piece of the pie? And so I started to make other little sculptures that were sort of a celebration of like self-sovereignty and reclaiming wholeness as a complete person in and of myself. And I would make those little figures. And then I started to sell them, and then I started to get requests, and I got lots of requests for customization. Can you make one? I laugh about it now, but somebody's like, can you make one just like this? Only it's a mermaid and has 3 babies. And I'm like, well, that's nothing like what I make.
Right, right.
Like what I make. And so I'm sitting there thinking, like, what I had all these ways, like, how could I customize them? What could I do? And how could I communicate what people want to communicate? Because they meant so much to people as a representative of their story. And I thought, what if I made something that was a tell your story goddess? That's what they originally called, tell your story goddess, that could communicate many things to many people with one figure design instead of endlessly making mermaids with 3 babies. And then I had a man once at the, this is hilarious. I'm sorry, this is a side story. I used to teach in the military base, and I went through the checkpoint. You had to go through these checkpoints, and they look in your car with like metal detectors and things, and they look in your trunk. And so I went through, and I'm teaching my class, but I have my goddess necklaces on. I'm driving through the gate. The man at the gate, who's got guns and stuff, stops me, and he says, "Wow, I really love your necklace. Like, what do you call that?" And I'm like, "It's a goddess." And he's like, "Oh, could you make me one like that? Only it's a werewolf holding a moon." Well, that's nothing like what I make. So I just laugh about it.
It's the size that appeals to people, right?
Yeah, it could be a werewolf holding a moon. So I'm literally like sitting in bed with my napping baby at the time. So I actually have 4 kids. And so the youngest one's a baby. He's napping in bed. A friend of mine had said, what if you made some kind of little chain that went around their head so it could have a customized charm, but the whole goddess herself doesn't need to change every time? And so she talked about the change. So I'm sitting in the bed with the baby. I had this sudden vision of the actual, like the story goddess shape, that the shape that she is. She like came to mind, and I actually like called, like, bring me my clay, And I sat there in bed by my sleeping baby, and I sculpted the original figure with space around her waist so she could have a little chain, so she could have this endless customization to help people tell their stories. Because what I realized is people want to express something, and they want to feel something, and they want to learn something. So there's all these experiences of the story. Is she telling your story, or are you listening to her story? Like there's all these different experiences. And as I was sculpting that figure, I actually saw like this chain, this 35,000 year chain of people who have sculpted goddesses for 35,000 years. And I could see them, I saw the Nile goddess, she's like going by. I saw the goddess of Willendorf. I saw that Inanna with the cupped breasts. Like they were all like dancing in my mind while I was sculpting as the baby. I'm like, don't wake up, baby. I'm working on my idea. And I sculpted the original figure, and that he's 9 now. That baby who was sleeping while I sat there in the bed with my clay is 9. And so really that's where they came from, was from that desire to help people make tangible contact with the divine, but also to share something about themselves in that way. And so each goddess, the named goddesses have a story that goes with them. So the story connects. So each one has a poem that starts with listen, and then it tells her story. But we do customizations for people so that the goddess, either she can tell you a story, or you can tell your story through her. So that's where the story goddess came from. But yes, kind of that's a long story of the story goddess.
And they're very popular. I like things. I like talismans, you know what I mean? I don't carry a purse, so I carry things in my pockets.
Absolutely, yes.
And I have an Ellen of the Ways etching on wood that actually somebody else on Etsy made specifically for me, because there was a larger one on a piece of wood that hangs on an altar in my bedroom. And I said, can you take just this part of the image and put it on something smaller? So I carry that in my pocket. I have these 2 little pewter angels that my wife gave me like 15 years ago when we first met. One says blessings and the other one says belief. And I put those in my pockets, and depending upon what I'm trying to put out there in the world that day, I'll choose a particular crystal to put in my pocket that morning, or so. Yeah. Tangible.
Yeah, really.
Tangible,
pocket.
Tangible divinity.
Absolutely. And pockets can be like their own altar spaces. They really can be.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got altars all over my house. So of course I have one in my pocket.
Absolutely.
So we had talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about today. So let me start by saying, Molly, I really think that the work that you do is so crucial, because one of my complaints, I guess, about women's spirituality or the women's spirituality movement, or at least what I've been exposed to, a lot of what are being promoted as goddess centered are really about things like sovereignty and getting out from under the patriarchy. And although I believe that those two things are connected, what I see lacking is discussion about prayer and
Mhm.
reverence and actual worship. I mean, I call myself a goddess worshiper.
Whatever. Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I get frustrated when there's so much emphasis on self-empowerment, although of course we're at a time in history where we need women to have self-empowerment. I feel like the spirituality piece, it gets lost in the mix. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and
And then
yes.
we're just following the same, then we're just stuck on the same hamster wheel of I've got to do it myself, pull myself up by my bootstraps and blah, blah, blah. And I think you're missing out on this valuable resource. And the reason I talk about my own spirituality so much is because there's so much respite and relief and comfort
Absolutely.
there. So how do we, I mean, one, what are your thoughts on that? And two, what can we do to kind of bridge that a little bit?
Mhm. Well, I do think it's important. So I was not raised in a religious household, so I don't have I guess, the scars of the past to unpick or unknot. And
Right,
so some ways I find that there's a little liberation there in that I don't necessarily have the baggage with words like prayer or devotion or devotional practice. In fact, I find those words very inspiring and intriguing and enlivening and rich. And
right,
so I do think that we have to acknowledge that people have a lot of scars and they have a lot of baggage. And so it can be really hard to sometimes reclaim those kinds of words because
right,
people think they can only mean one kind of religion. They
right,
think they can only mean one kind of religion. So I don't have any problem at all saying the word prayer or writing prayers or writing blessings. And, I do recognize that it makes some people shy away from that language makes some people shy away. So they're still seeking the feeling, but the language is frightening is maybe the wrong word, but the language is off-putting. I
yeah,
think prayer is like this. It's so, and to me, I don't have the baggage layered on that says a prayer has to be petitionary. You have to be asking for something or
right,
begging for something that you're not any good and you have to be appealing to something. To me, a prayer is, prayers carry people across continents, they guide sick people home. They
right,
honor transitions and beginnings and openings and closings. And prayer is like the language of the spirit. Prayer is the language of the soul. And
right,
prayer, in many ways, is how we reach out to the sacred and feel the sacred reaching back to us through
right,
through prayer. But I rarely offer prayer that I would consider to be in a petitionary sense or like I'm asking for something. It's more of a statement or an affirmation of what I wish to see in the world or what I am honoring that I do see. It's an honoring of what I see. And so I feel like everything that I create is really meant to be very usable, like very practical. It's supposed to be used. And one of the reasons that I created 30 Days of Goddess, which is the daily devotional practice that
mhm,
I created at the very end of 2020. And then it's been going continuously since the official start was in January of 2021. So it's been going continuously since then. So
right,
we're up to 1,200 days or something of continuous practice. And one of the reasons that I created that is because I had so many people who were interested in the goddess, or they're interested in the sacred feminine, they're interested in the divine feminine, they're interested in let's say alternative spirituality of some
sure,
kind. But the question was like, I have this interest, I have this feeling, I have this, desire to connect, but what do I actually do? Like, what do I
right,
actually do? And so for me, creating this devotional practice was one answer to this is something that you can do. Because I do think people are kind of starved for that connection
right,
to experiencing. And so when you have a little card that you can read, or a prayer that you can offer, or a poem that you can share, or a body, I'm really into body-based practices. So a body-based practice that you can do, or a simple ritual. When you know what you can do, then your life becomes richer and deeper with that support. And I tell people all the time, like, a daily practice is here to support and nourish and sustain you. It's not here to tell you what to do. It's not here to make you feel bad that you're not doing it right. It's here to support you and nourish and sustain you. And you really will receive like so much. It really can transform your life to embark on a devotional practice. And the devotional practice can be just to kind of a grand sense of the sacred, the great grand web of incarnation that holds us all, the universe, the kind of your general sense of the infinite. Or it can be a very devoted practice to a specific goddess, or it can just be the great goddess, the overall great goddess, or it can be in dedication. So there's a lot of room within devotional practice to have it be the language that speaks to your soul. But I just love to provide people with things that they can actually use and actually apply instead of just reading about it. Because I think we read things and we have this hunger to have an experience, like you hunger to have the experience. And I really think you can have the experience every day in some way. Like for me, in daily practice, devotional practice, that means you have a small taste of magic at least every day. It doesn't have to be saved for only high holy days or group ritual, but you can have a taste of magic that helps to sustain and refuel you every single day.
Right. So what I ran into, I had this kind of failed experiment that maybe I'll return to it and maybe it'll become a thing and maybe it won't, but with the Church of the Goddess and having the Church of the Goddess website, and that is a lot of that pushback that I ran into is that language, right? Because people hear things like church, service, sermon, devotion, reverence. To them, it makes them feel like, well, you're just reinventing the wheel, these patriarchal religions. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not subservient, unless you want to choose to serve. If you want to pray to the goddess and say, what would you have me do?
Right.
That's voluntary subservience, right? Which I do. But it wasn't, you know what I mean? I feel like I had a hard time making people understand. No, this isn't that. This is a reclaiming.
And for me,
of those.
That's right. Yeah. For me, it's a powerful act. It's a powerful act of like resistance and revolution and like radical like reformation, so to speak, to say, actually, this language does belong to me too. Like this does belong to me too. And my body can be my own sacred space. My landscape can be my sacred text. My life can be this holy text from which I'm learning. So I find great power in saying, this language is mine too. This language is mine too. And what I feel with it is very different than what maybe other people describe. I thought I had a poem about that, like with like these acorns are my rosary kind of thing, because I think all those language, rosary and devotion and prayer and dedication and ritual and rite and sacred and holy, all those words, it's like, oh, there's so much there and it belongs to us too. It doesn't belong to one tradition only. So I thought maybe I could find that poem real quick, but apparently I can't. So that's okay.
Well, if you come across it, we can come back to that.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, and that's, like I said, that's kind of what I was trying to do, was that was a reclamation process for myself, because the women have been gathering in the name of the goddess for hundreds of thousands of years.
That's one of the things I say. We're still here.
I just wanted to do it in a dedicated space. You know what I mean? And and I would explain things to people, like the actual dictionary definition of religion or church or whatever. And if you look at, because I'm a big word person and I'm still teachable, so I do look things up in the dictionary to say, what does that word really mean? And I feel like that takes some of the scare factor of some of those words out of it. If you look and see what, like, don't take somebody's opinion for what the word means. Look it up in the dictionary, see what it really means. and I wasn't suggesting some sort of conformity either. I mean, when I wrote about Church of the Goddess, it was all inclusive. It was all goddess paths. There are a million goddess paths all over the world, right? This was just a way to bring a commonality, which I guess we have. But if you listen to the show, I often complain about being lonely in the Midwest, and because you can't, goddess worshipers hard to come by in Central Illinois. But I have you guys, right? I have my online world, which thank the goddess, right? So something else that I run into that I wanted to ask you about, because you are all about daily practice, as am I. There are a lot of excuses of why people won't or can't do that. And I admit that it has taken me all these years of practice that I can honestly say I have done daily prayer and meditation every day only for the last 2 years. Prior to that, it was in fits and starts. And so what do you tell people who come to you and say, I really want a daily devotional practice, but I just can't?
Okay, so I have lots of ideas about this. And one is that it has to be something that fits your actual life, the life that you're actually living right now, not the perfect life, not somebody else's life on Instagram, not the idealized life or the idealized self, which I do think we can meet our best selves in daily practice. But when we create a practice, it has to be a practice that fits our lives. So what I suggest to people is commit. There's a great power in something. And so if we commit to a sacred something that actually fits our life, whether that is a morning prayer that we promise to offer, whether that is a poetry practice, whether that is a daily reading, I have my daily reading book, whether it's a daily reading, commit to something that's small enough to actually fit your life. And then that's your sacred something. And then keep your promise to that sacred something. And when you notice, and the greatest power is you, if you get to the end of the day and you think, I didn't do it, I didn't do my practice, that's your moment right there. The moment that you notice that you didn't do it, that's your invitation into the sacred something. So for me, I started with simply I have prayers that I say in the morning, and I say them in the morning before I get up. And so it's the first thing. I wake up with a prayer on my lips, and it's the same prayers. I memorize them. I have a series of prayers. And for me, and that's one of those things that's the power of prayer for me, is it's like the breath. It goes with you everywhere. You don't need
I tell people that all the time. I'm like,
yeah.
as soon as you open your eyes, before your feet even hit the floor, before you pee, before you do anything, because the moment you're in motion, your brain says, oh, thank goodness you're awake. We have so much to talk about. You know what I mean? And you're off and running. So I'm like, as soon as you open your eye, just find something to, even if you don't have a dedicated prayer, find something. Just so I wake up every morning and I say, thank you, Goddess. Just because I woke up, I breathed all through the night without assistance. You know what I mean? And I woke up to another day. And then I take a few minutes to appreciate the softness of my bed, or that my dog's sleeping next to me, or that I have a wife that I love is next to me. You know what I mean? And just take a few moments. So I tell people about their prayer life. Gratitude goes a long way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and then I feel like I describe it kind of metaphorically as having a blessing basket, a metaphorical blessing basket. And you can have a real blessing basket where you have an oracle deck and a candle and a little goddess, or you can have an actual blessing basket, but a metaphorical blessing basket, which is some prayers that some breath-based practices that some body-based practices, a altar space or a window that you can look out of, a space where you can step outside. If you have this blessing basket from which to draw, you can craft a daily practice out of that metaphorical blessing basket. And so on a day where you have lots of time, you can read the book, you can draw the cards, you can write in the journal, you can do the art, you can offer the prayer, you can meditate, you can do all those things in a day where you have lots of time. In a day where you don't have a lot of time, lost you for a second. Okay, sorry about that. I was getting some kind of notice. I tried to dismiss it and then you went away, but now you're back. Okay. And then on a day when you have a short amount of time, I'm very fond of offering what I call 3 breaths of presence, where you just put your hands on your heart and you offer 3 breaths, or you use a hand that you offer a breath from your head, a breath from your heart, a breath from your belly. And if that's what you have to offer that day, that's still your practice. I really feel like a practice, the commitment that you make can be as simple as taking a few minutes with your hand on your heart to look out the window, or to say, as you said, Goddess, thank you. I'm fond of saying, Goddess, guide me, peace, fill me, life, weave me. That's my basic like anchor prayer. I do it, the Goddess, guide me, peace, fill me, life, weave me. And I will do that. I will look out the window. You can do that while you're driving. You could do that in the hospital if you need to.
Right.
And it's so the practice I talk about is the smallest possible practice. And then you build from there. But if you have to come back to only that 3 breaths of presence with your hands in your heart, or if you have to come back only to Goddess, guide me, you still have a practice. You still have a practice. So the biggest issue is that people make it bigger and more complicated, and then they feel like they fail because they can't do it all. And I do a ton of things. I have an abundant blessing basket of many devotional practices, but it's that smallest, simplest one, that prayer on your lips in the morning. If you have that's commitment to the sacred something, to the very smallest, simplest practice you can offer, then in as many ways, you can never be lost from that. You can never be severed from it, because you always have those hands against your heart. There you are. There you are. You've come back home again.
Right. And I'm also fond of saying, because the goddess is all most representative in the natural world, she's easy to see. You don't have to look far for her. But that's why I think that I breathed all night long, right? That's what the body is, a miracle.
Absolutely. Well, I did find my little poem, which connects what you just said. And so it is this, and this is what I feel like is that reclamation of that language, but also an experience of that embodiment of, the sacred life is this life. Like that's what we're doing right now.
Right.
So here it is. I am an everyday mystic in the temple of the ordinary. My holy book, these roots and stones. My scripture is in branch and berry, moss and thorn. My hymn is river song and bird chorus. These trees, my chapel. This rolling earth, my guru. This sky, my guide. These acorns, my rosary. I kneel at the feet of wonder. I bow my head to beauty. My breath a prayer, my life an offering, laid out against the altar of this spinning world.
Thank you. Which book is that from?
That is not in a book, or that was in my notes. It was in my saved notes. So it must be in a book. I write so much that sometimes I forget what's in what book. So it might be in 365 Days of Goddess. I think it is just still saved in my notes for a future book.
Okay. So what was I going to ask? Okay, so prayer, and what I feel like meditation is so crucial, but that's another thing that I find people don't find the time for. And I beg people, I'm like, just take 10 or 15 minutes, because I myself, I'm a seasoned meditator, but I still only meditate unless I'm listening to a guided meditation. I only meditate for 15 minutes, because if I can't get in the zone after 15 minutes, after that, it's a losing battle. I'm just struggling against myself. So I just give up and think, well, try again later. Or if later doesn't come, then I'll try again tomorrow. You know what I mean? So meditation.
Yeah, so for me, my central practice is in bearing witness, which I would consider to be an eyes open meditation. A lot of people associate meditation with sitting with the eyes closed. And so, and I have had those experience. I've had meditation practices that involve sitting with your eyes closed, but I find that my most powerful meditation is sitting with my eyes open for 10 to 15 minutes in the same place and seeing what unfolds, bearing witness to the miracle, bearing witness to what is and life as it unfolds. For me, that is my meditation and I keep a date. I keep that date holy every day is stepping outside and bearing witness to what is. And I sit and I look and I listen and I feel, and those are the most powerful acts of magic I know, are looking, listening, and feeling and bearing witness to what there is. So for me, that's my meditation, is stepping out and stepping in with the eyes open and senses extended instead of inwardly drawn. I feel like we have the same, I feel like we can have a similar sense from softening the senses so they extend, not as opposed to, but in addition to the withdrawing of the senses inward. I feel like the same type of mental state happens whether you're extending them outward or you're withdrawing them inward, because basically it's about being present. Like that's what meditation is about, being present with what is. So I find that an eyes open meditation outside is a central spiritual practice for me, but it's about extending into what's there, into what I can experience in the present.
Right. So I my own meditative practice these days, it changes every once in a while because it can become bored and repetitive. And I used to only be able to meditate with guided meditations. Now I find that distracting and can only meditate without them. But I do usually close my eyes. But I use a consistent auditory noise like the HVAC system or a fan, or because it's something I don't have any judgment about, right? Like I don't listen to my furnace and think, I've heard better. You know what I mean? So I find that auditory tuning in is good, just as is what you described, and also having your eyes open, but having a focal point like a candle flame. I used to do that a lot. They used to call it candle or flame walking or fire walking. Fire walking, that was it. So, boy, there was something else I was getting. Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. So, of your 10 books, which was the first book, and how long ago did you write that one?
Okay, so my first book was Womanrunes, which I wrote in 2014. And that's based on the work of Shekinah Mountain Water, and is an oracle system, an oracle guide. So the first book I wrote was Womanrunes, and it's still my most popular book. Like it's still the one that sells copies every year, and the one that almost has a life of its own. It was very much it really does. It almost has a life of its own. Like it's extended. It's sold in, people in all kinds of different countries have it. And I think because it's practical and you can use it and you can engage with it every day, I have not stopped. I found Womanrunes in 2012, I believe, in an old magazine from 1988. And there was these symbols in this magazine, in this old article by Shekinah Mountain Water, who passed away before I even encountered them. And they really captivated my attention. And I actually have not stopped using them every day since 2012, basically. So I wrote the book in 2014. I revised it. There's a second edition. So it was revised and republished in a couple of years after that. And it just really does. It really has this kind of life of its own. I still use them every single day. Like it's still something that I use every single day. So that was the first book.
And so what was your first book of poetry?
My first book of poetry was Earth Prayer, which I wrote based on my Woods priestess practice, which I've shared about in a couple of different contexts. But this kind of actually connects to what we were just talking about with the stepping outside, opening your eyes and seeing what unfolds, which is in 2012, so the same year that I found Womanrunes, I started what I call the Woods priestess practice, which was I decided I was going to go down to the same rock in the same little chunk of woods, and I was going to go down there every day for a year and see what I learned. And so I went to the same rock, I saw what I learned, And my theory was that I would be able to experience some kind of moment of magic, insight, inspiration. Something would happen, even if I would be in the same place. And so, and I described it as like, it's possible to make friends with a rock. You know, it's possible to make friends with trees. It's possible to make friends with your landscape that you live on. It's possible to know them and love them as much as you know and love anything that you know and love. And so I went down there, and I was working on my doctorate at the time. And I decided I was going to do, I called it a pit stop in master's degree in divinity. So I already have a master's degree, a regular traditional master's degree from a regular school. And I started the seminary program, and I was working on the doctorate of ministry. And I thought, I'm just going to go ahead and do like a pit stop master's of divinity instead, because it was like 2 other classes, and I could just go ahead and do the master's of divinity and then continue with the doctorate. And so I wrote my thesis for the master's of divinity based on this woods priestess practice and the going down to the woods and seeing what I could experience. And that thesis essentially became Earth Prayer, my first book of poetry. Like, I took the poems out of that practice experience and published them into a book. That was published in 2015 after the thesis project was complete. So that was the first book of poems. And then, and pretty much most of what I write now is books of poems or prayers. So I actually have my 12th book. So I sent you the bio, but hadn't been quite updated. So I've actually written I have another book of poetry that I wrote after that bio. And then I have a new devotional that's coming out in March. So that'll be my 12th book. 12th book is coming out in March. And so the only other one that's...
I was just going to say, so what are the ones that are coming out? What's the one that's coming out in March?
The one that's coming out in March is called Replenish, and it is spots of time for reconnecting with the sacred and yourself. And it is a little devotional prayer book that's a 90-day devotional, essentially. So it's 3 months worth of readings for every day. So it itself forms its own daily practice. You get the little book, you sit down, you have your little mini ritual, you open it up to that day, you have something to read, something to reflect on, something to think about, or something to offer. The prayers in it can either be offered as a prayer or they can be received as a blessing. So that's the one coming out in March.
I have to tell you, I have toyed with the idea of coming out with a daily meditation book, but you seem to have that covered. Not that there can't be more than one of us out there in the world.
That's right.
Because a non-goddess daily reflection, daily meditation book that I use has a quote from some piece of literature, followed by meditation for the day, what you're to think about, followed by a prayer for the day. And I like that format. So I thought about doing that. But I have to say that I'm glad that you do what you do, because no one else is. I have one book. I have my the little book of goddess prayers, which was the only book before your books I had ever found that was specifically goddess, feminine, divine, or some derivative of that. They are hard to come by. And I was going to say, I wonder why that is, but I guess that goes back to this idea of prayer and what prayer is and what prayer means. But I think that women and some men are hungry for that.
Yes.
I've been talking to this man that contacted me through Church of the Goddess, and he said, he feels like I do here in the Midwest. He's like, I'm a man, I'm a goddess worshiper. Where are the other male goddess worshipers? How can I join a prayer circle? Or because I can't come to a women's circle. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. I don't have anything to tell them. You know what I mean? What do men do?
Well,
is your husband a divine feminine person?
Well, I mean, we do our whole businesses run together. So he spent most of the time, I mean, he's instrumental in making a lot of what we make and a lot of what we sell. I do think, and I do find, so I have 3 sons also, and 1 girl. And I remember a moment when my second son was I don't know, he was about 5 or something like that. And he said, Mom, wouldn't it be weird if there was a goddess, but it was a boy? And I thought, wow.
Right.
So I have 2 thoughts there. One is a little bit, I patted myself on the back a little bit for raising boys in a house that did not, that basically only had feminine images of divinity and didn't even consider the fact that there might be a god, because they were so surrounded by goddess imagery that he just thought it was a really shocking possibility that there could be like a boy god, that wouldn't it be weird if there was a boy god out there, and which is the opposite experience that most people have. It's rare to encounter a goddess and to say, whoa, there can be this female experience of God, of the goddess. But then the second part of it, I felt sad. I was like, oh, he feels excluded. He doesn't, just like girls for years have not seen themselves reflected in masculine divinity. He is expressing that he's not seeing himself reflected in my offering or experience or representation of spirituality. And so I had both experiences. So my husband and my boys all join me. But I consider myself, a hearth priestess in the way, in that we do our Wheel of the Year celebrations, and the boys and my husband and everybody sings the songs, and we all hold hands and we say, may Goddess bless and keep us, may wisdom dwell within us, may we create peace. That's one of our core, we end every family ritual holding hands by saying, may Goddess bless and keep us, may wisdom dwell within us, may we create peace. And so they all still do that. The oldest one's 20 now. That the second one I was just talking about is almost 18. And my husband too. They will all join in and offer those prayers. And they will anoint each other's heads with oil. And they will offer, we used to do foot bath ceremonies, and they'd line right up to put their feet in the special foot bath ceremony that we did. And they will sing all the songs and that kind of stuff. But I'm the one who initiates that. Like if I didn't say, hey, it's the spring equinox, let's get together and have our ritual, right, my husband wouldn't do it without me. He wouldn't do it without me. I'm the initiator of that. But they all join in, and we stand in the field and we sing at the solstice, and we throw our sunbread up to the sky and shout out what we're grateful for. And so we have a shared spiritual practice as a family. And I read from my 365 Days of Goddess book to them in that context. So we have a shared spiritual practice, but my husband does sometimes express, and the same thing, Womanrunes can be used by anybody, but he's like, yeah, but they are called Womanrunes. And so he has expressed before that he wishes for that kind of sacred space that is, where he doesn't feel left out because he's a man, basically. And so I've had an in-person circle for years since, and so I do think it's fully possible to create in-person community in the Midwest. I've done it for a lot of years. It can be difficult, and I do find that I have to expand my language. For me, what worked is to have a red tent instead of a goddess circle, to have a red tent, and that was much more inviting to people from a lot of different backgrounds, felt like they were welcome. And then they'd be like, ooh, we want to get a little bit more witchy. Ooh, we need to get a little more goddessy. We'd like to sing more, so I steered away at the beginning from straight up, we all come from the goddess type of chants. We would sing sort of more non-goddess based chants, more kind of more pagan type of things. And then as we continued to work together, and they're like, oh, we want to get a little deeper, we want to dig in, we want to reclaim more of this power and this magic and this goddessness and our witchiness and all that kind of stuff. So now we sing all the goddess songs. Nobody has any problem with it. But it takes time to cultivate that trust, I think, in kind of being all out there with the goddess. And I remember one of the things I joke about is quite a few years ago, I was at Little Caesars, getting pizza, and I had my goddess necklace on, and the woman at the counter said, is that a goddess? And I said, yes. And she said, well, I've heard of the goddess before, but I've never seen anyone flaunt it like that. So occasionally I would use the hashtag flaunt the goddess, because I really do think there is an inborn, a witch wound, where people, especially Midwestern people like us, there's a little bit of a sense in the back of your mind that somebody might show up with the burning torch. Really.
Right.
Like there really is that. And I think women in general carry a little bit of that internalized fear,
Yes.
but I think geographically speaking, those of us in the Midwest really do feel strongly that it's a risky act. It's risk.
Yes.
There's risk involved with saying goddess, with using that language, with claiming that magic and that spiritual authority, even to even dare to speak. To dare to even speak that way is like a radical and risky act. And I think we carry that sensation of they could show up with the torches, like they really could. And so there's a little bit of fear associated there that can shadow people's experiences or what they're able to offer. So I got a little bit off track there. You were asking about my husband and the spiritual connection and things like that. And so, yes, my husband and sons join in spiritual practice with me, but it definitely takes me to be like the leader or the initiator of that. And I've done multi-age, multi-gender rituals for a number of years too. And I had a coming of age ceremony for my son when he turned 8, when he turned 18, because I was thinking about how we have these rites of passage for our daughters, like I'm steeped in that. Oh, you have a rite of passage for your girl. And then I'm like, oh, but I've got these boys and they need a rite of passage ceremony too. So we had a rite of passage ceremony for him. And the same thing, like I see this is from a goddess perspective. And we didn't talk about that earlier, but I think there's a difference between a goddess worshiping path and a pagan path. I think there's a difference there. They're siblings, but there's like a distinct trajectory. And I come from like that, the goddess feminism kind of perspective, which is really has its own lineage. It has its own roots. It has its own history, compared to paganism, which has a different, and Wicca, which have their own path. So they're kind of like walking along together, but there's some divergence there, and they have different roots and different source material and different philosophies, really, almost.
Right.
And so in a lot of the pagan literature, rites of passage for boys and men, to me, as a mother, they involve this every book I have is like, then the men come and they kidnap the boy and like take him away from the mother, and they take him out in the woods, and then he has to like basically learn to be a man alone. And I had one book, it was like the rite of passage for boys, and it's like everybody's supposed to bring this rock that symbolizes their wisdom, and they come to the circle, and then they basically like take the boy away alone, and everybody throws their rocks away and says, you have to find your own wisdom. And I read that outline as a mother of sons, and I thought, isn't that still patriarchy in action, where boys have to be separated from their mothers? So just putting a label on it and calling it pagan doesn't make it actually whole and healthy. And so if we call a pagan ceremony for a boy, still involves separating him from community, saying he has to stand alone, he has to be independent, he has to make his own wisdom, he has to find his own way and has nobody to rely upon. That's patriarchy in disguise. That's upholding that same notion that men are supposed to be on their own with nobody, and that having support is weak. And I thought about that, and I had a mother of a son who wanted a ceremony for her son, and I thought about my own sons, and I thought, I know how to do this work with women and with girls, and boys and men deserve exactly the same thing. They want, what they need to know is not that we're going to throw away our wisdom and say you have to find it for yourself. We're here. We're your community. We're here. And you will walk alone sometimes, but you have us, the people who will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, the people who will build houses with you, the people who will cook with you, the people who will show up for your birthday party. Like, that's us. We're here for you. And just like I would say to a girl on the cusp of womanhood, the core of a ceremony for a girl on the cusp of womanhood is you're here and you belong to this wider circle, and we've got you, like, we're here for you. That's exactly what boys need too. We're here for you. We got you. You're part of this larger circle. So I had that ceremony for my friend's son when he turned 18. I had a ceremony for my son when he turned 18, and when the next one turns 18, he's going to have a ceremony too. And you just invite the people to come, and we can stand in the circle with him just like we can stand in a circle with a girl, and we can say, we believe in you, we trust you, you're powerful, you're strong, you're magic, you can find your own way. And we got you. We're here, and we can sing together and celebrate and honor. And it doesn't need to be gender divided to still communicate that same core message, which is you belong to something. You belong to something, and you're loved.
Right.
You're loved, and you don't actually have to walk alone. Like if you need to, you got what you need, but you don't have to walk alone because we're here. We're here. And so that's the example when I had that ceremony for my friend's son, and it's multi. Everybody came, his cousins, his uncle, his dad, his friends, my kids were there, and we all stood in the circle together with the boys and the men and the women and sisters and everybody. And I told the story about, like, we're not going to take our wisdom and throw it away and say you have to search for it in the dark wood. You don't have to search alone in the dark wood. Like we can share what we have to share with you, and you can take what works for you and let it support you. Like, we're here for you. So it was like a powerful moment of realizing that we all
well, and
it.
it's a return to the way things were, right? I think I've said this in every episode so far of this season, which is that we have to start explaining to people that matriarchy is not the opposite of the patriarchy.
Absolutely.
Patriarchy is an egalitarian society.
Yeah.
And boy, sometimes I just get I think, boy, we really fucked ourselves as a species with this whole gender thing. And gender, because gender is largely a societal myth, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And a lot of people don't understand the difference between biological sex and gender. Those aren't the same thing.
Right.
We made it the same thing, right?
And people in general all deserve ceremony, celebration, community, song, connection, sacred experiencing. All people. It doesn't know, like, gender, sex, nothing needs to interfere with people. All deserve access to that kind of support and encouragement and nurturing. Like, everybody deserves ritual. Everybody deserves ceremony. Everybody deserves prayer. Everybody deserves sacred experiencing.
Right.
And
I agree, but here we are under the lash of patriarchy for the last 6,000 years. So it's no wonder we can't make.
No wonder we can't undo it. No wonder we can't all undo it with one ceremony.
Right. And I do know other women who have male children say that they've raised their sons with the goddess, and I think I had that conversation with Flora Ware a few seasons ago, and it's a lot. There's so much undoing, and I don't know that it's going to be undone in my lifetime, but you never know, right? I mean, miracles happen. By 2030, the world could be completely unrecognizable to how it is now.
Right.
Because periods of great change are always preceded by periods of great chaos. And the chaos is what we're in now. Which I think is why the goddess is so prevalent now. She's here to say that, look, there's a better way, really. And I think that, I've often said, I don't know if you've ever heard me speak about my diamond head god theory, which is that there's like the goddess, right? There's like the OG goddess, creatrix of all, the universe, us, other worlds, other whatever, everything. From her came everything. But then we have these individual goddesses, which I consider patron deities, but they are really all, I call her the diamond head god, one, because I like to use the words god and goddess interchangeably, as a way to combat that this means female and this means male. Because intellectually we know that the goddess is neither male or female anyway, right? It's a non-physical entity. But all of these patron deities, the goddesses that we all know, or goddesses that we pray to, are really just all aspects of the one goddess, which is why I call her the diamond head god. Do you agree with that?
What I've come to see, so I have a tendency to actually diverge from that a little bit. And I would have said So a number of years ago, I would have, said it, one name for kind of many facets or many things. But something that I've come to see, I feel like in my own practice and my own understanding of things, is that I do think that we had this, the birth of the universe, so to speak, the original flaring forth, that single, that original creative impulse that gave birth to everything else.
Right.
I feel like divinity itself. So I feel like there's the stuff of matter and there's the stuff of divinity. And we each have, a soul who was scooped out of that pool of divinity. And we each have a body that was scooped out of that pool of matter, so to speak.
Right.
And what I really actually think is that just like matter has coalesced into many different forms, I feel like divinity has coalesced into many different forms as well. And that those are distinct entities or experiences that are not necessarily just all the same, like not just necessarily like a reflection of the same thing, because they can be very different. And just like I'm not the same as you, but we're both people. We're both people and we're both humans who are alive at the same time. But we're actually distinct expressions and we're individual coalescings of matter and spirit that are individual. I feel like divinity is the same, that it's coalesced or evolved, if you will. If humanity has evolved from single-celled organisms into people, and matter, star stuff, has evolved into mouses and mice and books.
Right.
And divinity too has evolved into many different expressions and experiences. And I think that explains why we can have such widely different experiences, because we actually are relating to different forces.
Right. And I think in a way we're kind of saying the same thing, because when I say the diamond head, I just mean they're all different reflections of a singular source. That's why I call myself a monotheist, because yes, I have worked with and had relationships with and mystical experiences with multiple different goddesses, but I think there's a singular source. So, and that's why I stopped calling myself a pagan, because pagan almost by definition means you're polytheistic. And I tried that, and it just didn't work for me. You know what I mean? So I finally just had to kind of give that up and be like, you know what? I keep saying these words and taking these actions and talking to these people, and it's just not what I believe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And kind of own that for myself. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see if we really can, as a species, or or maybe this is the last iteration of us, right? I always say that, right? For all we know, we're like version, we're like human 8,667.2. You know what I mean? And maybe she's just ready to like wipe us off the board and start over again. You know what I mean? Maybe that's just the way it is. We don't know. But I hope that I see some great change in my lifetime and yours.
Yes, me too.
Because I do see this evidence that the goddess is alive and well in
that's what I see too.
ways, and it has its
like
place in this feminist revival that we're having, this kind of fourth wave feminism that we're in now. I think, I don't know, I guess we're still figuring it out, right?
Yeah. And I do feel like I still see hope and wholeness and goodness in the world. And so I really do feel like there is that almost, I don't know, like that. I don't know. I do think that the goddess is alive and magic is afoot. And I have another poem that I wrote that's about like, kind of getting mired down and thinking like everything's pointless and, there's no meaning and everything's kind of going downhill and going to be destroyed. And I thought, when I open my eyes and look around, that's not what I see. Like I see hope and healing. I see goodness. I see magic. I see beauty. I see wonder. Like, don't tell me to shut my eyes. Like, don't tell me to shut my eyes, because I see it. I see it right here in front of me. Like, and so you said that earlier. Yeah. And you said that earlier about the goddess. Like, we don't have to like believe in her because she's right there. Like, we have to believe in her because she's right there. We can feel her. We can see her. We can experience her right now. There's nothing, we don't have to try. We don't have to try to like force it because she's right there right now. And so, and I feel kind of the same way about getting sort of stuck in a spiral of like, everything's a disaster. I'm like, well, when I open my eyes, that's not what I see. Like when I actually
Right.
look, when I look around me, that's not what I see. So
and we see what we look for, right?
yes.
You're a positive, hopeful person.
Yes.
I don't know that I would describe myself that way, but I am. I mean, I am an optimist. You know what I mean?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Most of the time,
Uh-huh.
I do think, and just like you, I see what I look for. If I
Mm-hmm.
want to doom scroll and watch
Oh,
CNN, and
mm-hmm.
then of course that's going to be my worldview, right? I mean, we get
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Sometimes I read things
I'm
from
a
people.
law of attraction person, and we get what we think about whether we want it or not.
Well, I see people online sometimes who, and I'm just like, it really is not how I see things at all. I mean, like, it's really like we inhabit like literal different realities. Like we actually inhabit
Right,
different realities
right,
in different
right,
worlds. And I wish they could see like the joy and the good and the hope and the healing, because there's a
right,
lot of it. There's a lot of it. And that does not mean, I'm very clear that following a goddess-centered path and being a goddess worshiper does not mean turning your eyes away from suffering. It does not mean
no,
denying that terrible things happen. Not at all. But what it does is helps give you a resource base and a strength and a fuel and like a dare I say faith to keep going
right,
in with all of the unthinkable things that happen. There's terrible
right,
things that happen in this world, and it's not at
yeah,
all about turning our eyes away from that. It's about continuing to be like, if we can be, and I say that to my husband about the stuff that we make and what we do at Brigid's Grove, is that like it doesn't feel like enough, like when people are suffering and people are dying and bad things are happening, it doesn't like feel like enough, but it is what we can do. And if what we
right,
can do is offer something good, if we can offer something that gives people something to hold on to, if I can write a poem that makes people feel uh heard, that makes them feel supported, that makes them feel nourished, if I can do that, then that I'm putting something good out. And if I withhold my offerings out of shame because they're too small or they're not good enough or they're not going to save the world, if I withhold those offerings because they're not big enough to fix everything, then all that does is takes away one more piece of good. Right.
right,
So if I withhold it, there's just all that does is make one more piece of good go away. And
right,
that doesn't help
right,
anybody or solve anything to take
right.
away good.
Right. What can I do? I always talk about the collective
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. And in any given moment, I'm either doing my part to help raise that consciousness or
Yes.
I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
my part to help drag it down. What is
Yeah.
my choice to
Mm-hmm.
be? And like you, it isn't as if I don't acknowledge that there are terrible things in the world, but I
Mm-hmm.
choose not to focus on them,
Yes.
especially if there isn't something I can do about them.
Right.
So when people want to tell me about the woes of the world, I'm like, do you have I'm a very solution oriented person.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a solution that I can help with? Is there a cause I can donate money to? Is there a volunteering position? Or are you just coming to me to tell me how fucking awful the world is? Because if you are,
Right.
please go away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I know, I mean, and it's all about programming. I mean, I feel like we're in this great undoing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unlearning, deprogramming, reclaiming language to mean different things. You know what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
so many of the power structures that are in place right now have just been hidden in plain sight for so long. Like this is our normal. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like every day more and more people are like, you know what? This is not fucking normal.
Mm-hmm.
This is not normal.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, we're coming up on about an hour. So, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure you talk about?
Did have a quote that I pulled out to share, which I think relates a lot to
Okay.
what we've been talking about, kind of around, like we've been kind of coming around this same type of theme. And so I pulled out this quote I was thinking about this morning when I was thinking about this conversation, and I tracked it back down again. And I think it does. It speaks to that the creating change and the offering things and creating our own ceremonies and reclaiming language and everything. So it's a quote from Donna Hinnes, who wrote the book The Queen of Myself. It's a classic like 90s
Mm-hmm.
midlife women kind of transition guide, but I just love this quote from her. I have always said that I practice my religion exactly the way my ancestors did 50,000 years ago. I've always said I practice my religion exactly the way my ancestors did 50,000 years ago. I make it up as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
If our spiritual beliefs no longer speak to us, clearly we must change them. And so I draw upon that a lot. Like, I think sometimes, and that gets to people too, especially with daily practices. They're like, well, where's like the evidence for this? They want to know, like, where's the ancient book that told us that we were supposed to do this? Or, and pagan people can get very caught up in the, like, this is the way, this is the way that everybody did it. And we really have very little evidence for a lot of the way that anybody did it. And so I just love that, coming back to when we create a ceremony, when we write a poem, when we embark on a practice, we're practicing our religion the same way our ancestors did for 50,000 years. We're making it up as we go along. And sometimes we're tapping in. I think we can tap into ancestral memory. I think we can tap into the landscape. I think we can tap into the collective unconscious, the collective conscious. I think we can tap into like those forces that, that fuel of the infinite that spun the whole world out of nothingness. I think we can tap into that. I don't think we're totally making it up as we go along, but I love the acknowledgement that we can actively create this as we go. Like, we don't have to, we don't have to have all kinds of evidence and mandates. We don't have to have mandates and dogma. We can create what's coming from us right now. We can create what's coming from us. It doesn't have to, we don't have to legitimize, like, my desire to have a healthier ceremony for my son doesn't have to be legitimized by whether or not anybody had a ceremony like that in the past, or whether anybody even wrote about that in a book. I created that ceremony for my son because I wanted to create that ceremony for my son. And so it came from, it could be brand new. Starhawk, I think, said the truth of our experiences is valid whether it is 30,000 years old or 30 minutes old. It still is our experience, and we can still learn from that. So I wanted to share that. I saved that quote to share with you today.
Okay. So if you've listened to the show, you know that at the end of the show, I ask all the guests the same 3 questions. And if you haven't listened to the show, all the better, because then it's a surprise. So are you ready for your 3 questions?
Sure, ready.
Okay. First question. Tell me something about yourself that people would be surprised to learn.
Something that people would be surprised to learn. Okay, so the first thing that came to mind is I grew up in an off-the-grid house with no running water, no electricity, a windmill to pump the water, and solar panels to run things. I grew up reading by candlelight and having an outhouse instead of a bathroom. And and until my family was completely off grid until 2000. And then when Y2K didn't happen, they went ahead and got electrical power. So that is how I grew up. I used to do my brother and sister's wash my brother and sister's diapers in a Remer washer that you had to pump by hand and then feed them through, because we didn't have any running water. And I washed my hair in a bucket. And
You're right. I think
a wood burning hot water heater. My dad had to go make a fire before any of us could take a shower.
Okay. You're right. I think most people would be surprised to learn that about anybody. But particularly you, because you do seem worldly, and I don't know. You seem like you come from some other sort of humble beginning, but not quite that. You know what I mean? Not an insult. Yeah, I think, yeah, anybody. Have you told people that before? And they're like, wow, I never would have thought that.
Yeah, it's not something, it's just used to be something I talk about more. But yeah, that it hasn't come up in quite a few years. So I think that when most people watch this, they will not have heard that about me before.
Okay, good. Okay. Second question, current favorite TV series, or if you don't watch TV, the best movie, or your current favorite movie. Most people have a TV series.
Okay, so currently, we struggle to find a TV series we actually like. We try and reject many things. So currently we are watching Royal Pains, which we just started. So jury is still out on whether we're going to continue watching it or not. But so far we are enjoying it, but we're only on about episode 3. So
Is that the one
Pains.
with Eddie? Is that the one with Eddie Izzard?
I don't know. I don't
Okay.
think so. It's about a doctor in the Hamptons.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm thinking of. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Okay.
Yeah. So I
And
wouldn't exactly favorite. It's just what I'm watching right now, and we're kind of
Okay.
still feeling out.
Still feeling it out. Okay. And finally, if your life were a movie, humble beginnings included, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack to the movie?
Oh wow. Theme song on the soundtrack for the movie. I'm gonna have to go. This is not gonna sound quite right. I'm gonna have to go with "I Walk with the Goddess" by Kellyanna.
Okay.
That's gonna be playing as I ran across the field in my prairie dress. Okay.
No, that's good. And actually, 4 seasons in, no one has picked that song yet. So good for you.
No.
I'm working on, so I do have a public playlist from the first 2 seasons of everyone's answer to that question. And as you can imagine, it is quite an eclectic list. That's just a little fun thing. Like I said, it's on Spotify and iTunes. I have to find somebody to update the iTunes ones for me because I'm a Android user. So I can only update the Spotify one, but that's something I'm going to work on when this season is wrapped up, to update it with everybody's answers from season 3 and season 4. Okay, so I will be in touch. But Molly, thank you again for making the time to meet with me today. This is shaping up to be a really good season. I look forward to buying more Story Goddesses and more of your books. But until we meet again, I just want to say, as I do at the end of every episode, I wish you the peace and the love of the goddess.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching or listening to The Girlfriend God. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, follow, and comment. Episodes drop every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and you can follow The Girlfriend God on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.